Part 1 expanded to approximately 700 words. The wind swept across the open plains in long, lonely waves, carrying with it the dry scent of dust, sagebrush, and the fading echo of things long dead. Clara Reeves pulled her coat tighter as her horse, a tired old mare named Juniper, trudged ahead step by stubborn step. The sun hung low, a blazing copper disk melting into the western horizon, and each mile seemed to draw it closer to nightfall. Clara didn't want to be caught riding after dark, not this close to the borderlands. But she couldn't stop yet, not when she was so close to the land she'd risked everything for. She paused at the top of a rise, letting Juniper rest. Her gaze swept over the valley below, her valley now. 50 acres of rough, unforgiving land, dotted with twisted mesquite trees and yellowed grass fighting for life. To most folks, it was worthless soil. Too dry to farm, too isolated to defend, too far from civilization to be anything but a grave waiting to happen. But Clara didn't see what the doubters saw. She saw freedom. She saw a chance. She saw the first place in years where the ground wasn't soaked with memories she'd rather forget. She ran her fingers over the deed tucked safely inside her saddlebag. Official ink, official seal, signed by the land agent who'd raised an eyebrow at the sight of a lone woman walking into his office with a handful of coins and a jaw set too firm to argue with. No husband to vouch for you? He'd asked. No help. Clara had only met his gaze, steady and unflinching. No, she'd replied. Just me. Everyone in town had heard. And they'd stared, some with pity, some with curiosity, many with disbelief. A few whispered behind her back, loud enough for her to hear. She'll be back crying within a week, they'd said at the saloon. A woman can't survive out there. Not with all them bandits and wild beasts. Others had simply laughed, shaking their heads. But none of them knew Clara the way hardship had known her. She'd buried her husband 5 years earlier, a fever sweeping through the settlement in Missouri so fast it left barely enough time for goodbyes. She had packed up their life alone, traveled west alone, fought off sickness, hunger, and men who thought a woman alone was an easy mark. She had crossed swollen rivers, outwalked storms, and slept under stars that felt as sharp as knives. Survival wasn't new to her, it was the only constant she had left. As she led Juniper down into the valley, Clara felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. The half-built cabin stood at the far end of the clearing, its rough-hewn logs forming 2 solid walls and the outline of a roof yet to come. She had built it with her own hands. Every log dragged, rolled, and lifted by strength she didn't know she had until necessity forced it out. The tools she'd bought secondhand had splintered more than once, her palms were calloused and raw from rope and wood. But the cabin stood, like her, not finished, not perfect, but still standing. Clara dismounted and led Juniper toward the small corral she'd constructed. That was when she saw them, hoofprints. Fresh ones. Too many to be her own. Too deep to be from her mare. They circled the cabin once, twice, then disappeared into the brush. Clara crouched, pressing her fingers into the tracks. 5 horses, maybe 6. Heavy riders, heavy hooves, and not the kind of trail a harmless traveler leaves behind. Part 2 expanded to approximately 700 words. The first sign of danger was the wind, too still, too heavy, as if holding its breath before something terrible. Clara awoke before dawn, opening her eyes to the darkness inside her half-built cabin. For a moment she wasn't sure what had roused her, a dream, a noise, or simply the instinct she'd learned after months of traveling alone. She lay, still, listening, nothing but the soft crackle of cooling embers in the dying fire. But something felt wrong. Then came the distant thump of hooves. Slow, calculated, not the wandering gait of a lost traveler, but the cautious, deliberate rhythm of men who didn't want to be heard. Clara's breath caught. She pushed herself up, fingers curling around the rifle she'd slept with like a child clinging to a doll. She moved to the windowless wall and pressed her ear to the wood. More hooves. More than one rider. Maybe 3. Maybe more. The McCrae gang. It had to be. Clara's pulse ran quick and hot, but her mind stayed steady, cold as creek water in winter. She'd seen their tracks yesterday, and she had known, trouble wasn't far behind. She checked her rifle. 2 bullets. She had meant to ride to town today to buy more. Fate had decided otherwise. The sound of horses drew closer, then stopped altogether. Silence. A silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat thumping in her ears. She crouched low, moving to the water trough outside. It wasn't much cover, but it was solid and close to the cabin door. She eased the door open, wincing as the hinges creaked, and slipped into the cold morning air. A faint whisper of dawn brushed the horizon with a pale, dusty pink. Shadows stretched long and unnatural across the plains. Clara slid behind the trough just as a figure moved near her corral. A tall man, rifle slung over his back, eyes scanning the cabin. Another man flanked him, crouching near the fence. And somewhere to the left, she heard the soft jangle of a horse's bit. She counted 3, but there could be more in the brush. There usually were. Clara swallowed hard and steadied her breathing. She lifted her rifle and took aim at the nearest post beside their lookout. She didn't have bullets to waste, but she needed to send a message. She wasn't an easy mark. Her finger tightened around the trigger. One sharp crack split the morning stillness. Wood splintered inches from the lookout's hand. The men jerked back, surprised. "There she is," one shouted, diving for cover. Gunfire cracked in response, ripping through the boards of her cabin. Clara flinched as splinters flew, but stayed low. Dirt kicked up beside her cheek. Her heart hammered like a smith's hammer on iron, but adrenaline sharpened her focus. She peeked over the trough, scanning their movement. They were spreading out. They wanted to flank her, drive her into the open, corner her. Not today. Another bullet whistled past, grazing her arm. Pain flared hot, but Clara clenched her jaw and crawled backward toward the rear of the cabin. She needed better ground. She needed time. She needed that revolver buried in the ravine. The ravine was a quarter-mile behind the cabin, its deep shadows and rocky ledges the perfect place to hide a weapon she couldn't risk keeping close. Her husband's revolver. 6 chambers. 4 bullets left. It was her last real chance. The gunfire paused, just long enough. Clara took off, sprinting low across the brittle grass. Mud and dust flew with every step. She didn't look back. Behind her, the gang shouted and resumed firing. Bullets tore past her, thudding into the earth. A rock exploded beside her, showering her with grit. She dove behind a cluster of mesquite shrubs, lungs burning, and forced herself onward. Each step felt like walking through fire, but she kept moving. The ravine loomed ahead, a jagged scar in the earth. She slid down the steep bank, grabbing roots to keep from tumbling. The cold shade enveloped her. She crouched by a large boulder covered in lichen. Her fingers dug into the dirt, scraping until they found the handle of the wrapped revolver. She pulled it free, unwrapping the cloth with shaking hands. Part 3 expanded to approximately 700 words. The sun had climbed higher, burning the sky a harsh red-orange, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the rugged landscape. Clara crouched behind the boulder, revolver in hand, eyes fixed on the narrow pass where the McCrae gang was slowly advancing. Her body ached. Her arm still throbbed where a bullet had grazed her, but the pain sharpened her focus rather than dulling it. This was the final moment. There would be no running, no pleading, no luck to carry her out. This was survival, pure and unforgiving. The first man stepped into view, his boots crunching against the loose shale, rifle clutched tightly in his hands. Clara's finger rested lightly on the trigger, waiting for the perfect shot. She'd learned that in the West, hesitation killed faster than bullets. He hadn't seen her yet. He wouldn't. Not until it was too late. The crack of her revolver echoed through the ravine, bouncing off the rocks like distant thunder. The man stumbled, a shocked scream leaving his lips before he collapsed into the dirt, sliding down the slope. The other 2 froze, startled, their rifles jerking toward the sound. Clara stayed low, heart hammering but mind cold. 1 down, 2 to go. The second man cursed and charged, trying to force his way through the narrow pass. Clara lured him, subtly retreating behind a rock outcropping, forcing him into a bottleneck. His rifle caught on the rocks, throwing him off balance. She fired again. The bullet struck true. He dropped to his knees, clutching his shoulder, groaning in pain as he fell back. Only Silas McCrae remained, the leader of the gang, taller and broader than his men, his face a mask of fury. He stepped out into the light, rifle raised, eyes locked on Clara. His voice carried across the ravine, cold and menacing. "You could have walked away, girl," he said, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "No one's stopping you if you just leave." Clara's eyes narrowed. She could see the glint of sweat on his forehead, the way the morning sun caught the barrel of his gun. "I've walked away from everything else," she said, voice steady, even if her body trembled with exhaustion. "Not this." Silas fired, a sudden crack that splintered the silence. Clara rolled behind the boulder, dirt and gravel spraying her face. She pressed her cheek to the rock, catching her breath, then peeked around the edge. Her fingers closed tightly on the revolver. 4 bullets, 4 chances to end this. Silas advanced, confident, thinking the battle was nearly won. Clara waited, biding her moment. When he stepped onto the patch of loose gravel that marked the center of the pass, she rose slightly, taking aim. 1 bullet, straight to the chest. He staggered, catching himself on a boulder, eyes wide with disbelief. The second shot struck the ground at his feet, sending a spray of rock and dust, forcing him back. Silas hesitated. Clara took the third shot, and this time she aimed for his leg. The bullet hit, throwing him off balance completely. He fell to the dirt, rage and pain etched across his face. Clara didn't waste time. She stepped out fully now, gun leveled, finger tightening on the last round. "You wanted me gone," she said softly, almost to herself, almost to him. "But I'm still here." The final shot cracked through the morning air. Silas McRae slumped fully to the ground, silence flooding the ravine in the aftermath of gunfire. Clara lowered her revolver slowly, breathing hard, her legs trembling beneath her. She felt the blood in her hair, the scratches on her arms, the dirt caked into her coat, but none of that mattered. She had survived. Against odds that would have crushed most men, she had survived. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of gunpowder, dust, and sagebrush. Clara scanned the horizon. The valley was quiet again, the distant hills echoing with nothing but her own ragged breathing. She thought of the cabin waiting behind her, her claim to a life she could finally build without fear. Her hands shook as she adjusted the revolver on her hip, but the tremor was more relief than weakness. Clara Reeves walked slowly back to the cabin, each step heavy but purposeful. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, surveying the damage. Bullet holes marred the logs, splinters scattered across the floor, but the structure remained standing, like her. She set the revolver on the table, sitting heavily on the wooden bench, and let herself exhale for the first time in hours.